From the very beginning of the series, the battle between Gojo and Sukuna at his full power is something that we fans of Jujutsu Kaisen have been more excited for than almost anything else. You would be well within reason to say it was the most hyped up event in the entire series. And the week-to-week experience of reading it certainly matched that. However, with the fight's conclusion, this battle went from something home to almost universal praise and excitement to something of a great deal of controversy, and in many cases, a very strong dislike from the fans. This is due in large part to the ending of the fight. And the way the ending of this fight seems to contradict the portrayal of both characters' performances throughout. I can't really blame people for feeling this way, as reading it week to week, it definitely seemed like Gojo was dominating for a vast majority of the fight, and the sudden turnaround at the end was jarring, to say the least. However, I think this is a fight that benefits from a reread and a bit closer inspection more than any other, because upon doing so, you will come to the conclusion, at least I did, that, in truth, Gojo never really stood a chance against Sukuna. It's probably best to start off with a basic overview of the fight, looking at the way it flowed and played out from a weekly reader's perspective, chapter by chapter. The battle starts off with Gojo launching a surprise attack with an amped 200% hollow purple, which Sukuna manages to mostly withstand, presumably through the usage of domain amplification to reduce the damage. The fight begins in full with hand-to-hand combat, where Gojo takes a bit of a lead, largely through his implementation of Limitless, in order to thrash Sukuna around a bit and add a lot more impact to his attacks. It very quickly turns into a battle of domain clashes where Sukuna gains the upper hand due to his barrierless domain being larger than Gojo's. However, Gojo manages to withstand the onslaught of Malevolent Shrine through anti-domain techniques and his own very high output of Reverse Curse technique, and also Gojo using Reverse Curse technique to quickly restore his own curse technique and allow him to rejoin the battle in full. These clashes continue, with Gojo improving bit by bit until eventually he is able to overcome Sukuna and hit him with the sure hit effect of his domain. It's at that point that Sukuna swaps out with Maharaga, who has been passively adapting to Unlimited Void through the effect hitting Megumi's soul, destroying Unlimited Void. Gojo is then unable to use his domain expansion again due to the damage that's been incurred by his own brain through his constant usage of Reverse Curse technique to refresh his technique. Sukuna expects himself to be victorious, but actually took a fairly equivalent amount of damage due to his exposure to Unlimited Void, meaning both of them are no longer able to use their domain expansions. This definitely seems to shake Sukuna and gives Gojo a great deal of momentum that he carries with him far throughout the second round of this fight. Sukuna manages to last long enough for Maharaga to adapt to Infinity, allowing Maharaga to attack him outside of a domain and to drop Infinity so that Sukuna can land some attacks on Gojo using his curse technique. He then uses the power of 10 Shadows to create the Fusion Beast Agito and begins a 3v1 gang up on Gojo. Gojo comes to the conclusion that the only way to deal with the situation now is through an Unlimited Hollow technique. The battle eventually reaches a point where Maharaga gains the ability to cut through Infinity, severing Gojo's right arm in a surprise attack, but Gojo very quickly goes on to destroy Agito with a maximum output blue, and then fends off Sukuna and Maharaga long enough to perform his manual Unlimited Hollow, which destroys Maharaga and severely damages Sukuna. And then Gojo gets hit by the world-cutting slash and dies. It's quite sudden at the end there. One would definitely agree. The turnaround at the end seems incredibly sudden and is very jarring. Something that I didn't go over in this overview is some of the parts of this fight, or rather some of the things that really weren't in this fight, that a lot of people at the time noticed and thought were a little strange. Gojo and Sukuna, these guys who have two very big, powerful techniques, have a lot of things in their arsenal, are primarily just fighting hand-to-hand, and aren't really making a lot of use of their big, flashy techniques that they've used to finish off a lot of their previous opponents. One of the really strange things was Sukuna's behavior during this fight. He acted very differently from pretty much any other time we've seen him fight. Most of the time, Sukuna is incredibly aggressive and actively overwhelms his opponent with his superior power and speed. In this fight, he was doing anything but. For the most part, he was largely doing the opposite and playing incredibly defensively, with most of the actions he took being reactions to what Gojo was doing. And lastly, as Gojo himself pointed out, Sukuna made the active choice to make the fight take longer than it needed to, as during one of their earlier domain clashes, instead of choosing to attack the now weakened interior of Gojo's domain, he chose to take more time and prolong the encounter by instead strengthening Malevolent Shrine outside of Gojo's domain in order to destroy it from the outside. Why did he decide to do this? Why were they acting this way? Fortunately, there are some answers. When it comes to the way that both Gojo and Sukuna were acting in this fight, fighting relatively conservatively, not just throwing around their giant moves all the time, well, that's because their big attacks require a lot of cursed energy to cast, or take a while to activate, which is not remotely optimal in a fight as fast-paced as this, where either opponent can take advantage of the opening that using those moves would leave. It's just not the best move for them to use their big attacks just whenever during this fight. They need to have very specific and safe openings to use these moves against each other. That's why Gojo only used Hollow Purple at the very beginning of the fight when he didn't have any heat on him. And that's why, presumably, well, we'll get into Sukuna's reasoning for his decisions right now. And the reasoning for that is that Sukuna was approaching this fight very differently from the way Gojo was approaching it. For Gojo, this fight was an opportunity to cut loose for the first time against an opponent of equal strength to him, who has a very simple technique, and he doesn't need to think very much about the way to fight him, at least initially when he's not making use of Maharaga and the Ten Shadows technique. It's a very different case for Sukuna, because Limitless is a very difficult technique to fight against when you're not using your domain expansion. Going all out and using the various other techniques or tools at Sukuna's disposal would likely be completely pointless, because outside of a domain, those abilities would not be able to break through infinity. Even if he uses his fire arrow, or he takes Kamutoke into the fight with him, no matter how explosive those attacks are, they're not going to reach Gojo through infinity, so he has no reason to use them. And also, Sukuna isn't interested in just killing Gojo and moving on to the next fight. First, I'll start by peeling off those scales. This is a panel and a line that pretty much everyone has gone back to ever since the fight ended, because it reveals Sukuna's intention for what to do with this fight. However, it's not just him saying that he is going to deactivate Gojo's Infinity or remove it from Gojo's arsenal. No. He doesn't just want to do that. He wants to understand and surpass Infinity. And that goal is what drives Sukuna's plan and his behavior throughout the entirety of this fight. During the Shibuya incident, Sukuna encountered and fought the Divine General Maharaga, learning about its ability to adapt to any and all phenomena, and its ability to alter the properties of its attacks in order to be more effective against its opponent. As we saw when it altered the positive energy of its Sword of Extermination into normal cursed energy, as positive energy is not as effective against human foes as normal cursed energy is. After taking over Megumi's body and obtaining the Ten Shadows technique, he fought Yorozu as sort of a test drive for Ten Shadows, the various powers possessed by its Shikigami, and also the effectiveness of taking on the burden of Maharaga's adaptation against the enemy's technique, also being able to swap places with Maharaga and delve down into the shadows. And as is established in this fight with Gojo, Sukuna can figure out how to perform acts of cursed energy manipulation after seeing them just once, such as being able to turn himself into a cursed object and being able to use reverse curse technique to more quickly recover a burnt-out curse technique after performing a domain expansion. As long as it's not an exclusive ability to a curse technique, altering the conditions of a technique's attack range isn't too far of a leap in logic. This combination of abilities would allow him to perform attacks that could break through Gojo's impassable defenses and land a killing blow. He would just need time. So to summarize the mindset of these two combatants going into their fight, Gojo is going all out, while Sukuna has a specific game plan he's following that requires a certain amount of time to go into effect. A timer began on this fight from the first domain clash. A timer until Gojo is no longer able to use Unlimited Void, as its sure hit effect is passing through Sukuna and onto Megumi's soul, which is currently bearing the burden of Maharaga's adaptation. Sukuna actively chooses to prolong their domain clashes in order to increase the exposure Megumi's soul experiences and speed up Maharaga's adaptation to Unlimited Void. It seems like Maharaga may be only able to adapt to one phenomena at a time, so it's currently prioritizing Unlimited Void's info dump effect over Gojo's other techniques. The intention here is to remove Unlimited Void as a reliable move for Gojo, forcing him to make use of his techniques on a more basic level and give Sukuna more exposure to the effects of Infinity. The timer is up once Maharaga adapts to Unlimited Void, meaning Gojo failed to kill Sukuna before the first part of his plan could be completed. Sukuna sends Maharaga back to the shadows in order to prevent Gojo from focusing on the Shikigami and destroying it before the next part of Sukuna's plan can play out. Gojo initially falls short of Sukuna's expectations, as he's left completely incapable of using his domain expansion anymore, due to the damage he did to his own brain by using reverse curse technique to recover his technique faster. His disappointment with Gojo could be seen as a result of him not being strong enough to let Sukuna become even more powerful through fighting him. Essentially, he was disappointed that Gojo was an inadequate stepping stone. However, Sukuna underestimated the potency of Unlimited Void and Gojo's power, as he also incurred enough brain damage through his exposure to Unlimited Void to leave him incapable of using his domain as well. You see, this is one of the points of the fight where people don't really seem to understand that even if Sukuna is holding back and following a specific plan for fighting Gojo, it's still possible for Gojo to surpass his expectations and threaten the success of his plan, which is exactly what happens here. And that happening shakes Sukuna off his game a bit, which Gojo takes advantage of, thoroughly punishing him for his arrogance. And he gains a great deal of momentum that he carries throughout pretty much the rest of the fight. At this point, a new timer is beginning, however, because Sukuna still succeeded in achieving his first goal. This timer is one for Maharaga to adapt to infinity and allow the Divine General to attack through and lower Gojo's defenses. This timer is a much shorter one, only requiring 4 spins that get interrupted whenever Sukuna uses domain amplification to attack Gojo and defend himself. However, it is one that Gojo fails to beat as well, despite his remarkable performance in hand-to-hand combat and the applications of his technique. Because although he manages to land a black flash that knocks out Sukuna, it comes just a moment too late. Not only does Maharaga seem to possess a greater degree of autonomy than other Shikigami, but Sukuna also appeared to have set some sort of condition for swapping places with Maharaga whenever he became incapacitated, as we saw when he swapped places with the Divine General when he was caught inside of Unlimited Void. Now begins the final timer. Maharaga developing a more advanced adaptation to infinity, a direct counter. Everything that Sukuna does from here on out is for the purpose of prolonging the fight long enough for Maharaga's evolved adaptation to occur. The sneaky moves, creating Agito to turn the fight into a 3v1, everything. Gojo performs incredibly well for fighting 3 opponents at the same time and at this level, but the problem is the way that his attention is being divided. Sukuna's goal here isn't to overwhelm Gojo and land a killing blow, it's to keep him so busy dealing with everything going on that he doesn't have the opportunity to destroy Maharaga with one attack. Doing so is ultimately Gojo's goal, as he realizes and decides that the only way he can win this fight is by landing an attack with his unlimited hollow, a variation of purple that explodes outwards rather than focusing in a line, and one that he starts improvising right at this very moment in the fight. However, this realization and course of action comes too late. Maharaga's evolution is completed, and he launches an instantaneous attack that catches Gojo off guard and severs his right arm, severely limiting his ability to make full use of his techniques. At this point, Maharaga can be compared to one of those fancy calculators that you use for solving really complicated math problems and that show you the solution for solving the problem. You know, to make it easier to cheat on your homework. Sukuna, theoretically, could have always altered the targeting conditions of his technique in a way that would allow him to cut through infinity, but figuring out exactly how to do so on his own would be borderline impossible. Now that Maharaga had figured out and shown the solution, all that was left to do was for Sukuna to copy the answer. For lack of better terms, literally copying Maharaga's homework. The only thing Gojo could really do at this point to stop what's coming is land a direct hollow purple on Sukuna, which Sukuna himself has acknowledged as being enough to kill him at this point, and would be something that he's very on guard for. However, Gojo had already eliminated taking that course of action as a possibility in his mind, likely due to the fact that Sukuna was already on guard for such a move, and launching the technique would leave him open for too long. At this final stage, Gojo entered a heightened state of awareness and euphoria following the multiple black flashes he landed, giving him a boost to his dropping cursed energy output, and making him incredibly unpredictable and arguably the most dangerous he had been throughout the entire fight. This filled Sukuna with a great sense of unease that Gojo would pull out something unexpected and destroy his plan right before reaching the finish line. Relying on the maximum output blue he had already used to destroy Agito, Gojo took Sukuna off guard with an unconventional and improvised application of his red and blue, a maneuver that Mahoraga could not move quickly enough to intercept due to its own adaptation to blue, and that Sukuna was too slow and far away to interrupt. Gojo's unlimited hollow detonates, vaporizing much of Shinjuku, annihilating the Divine General and severely wounding Sukuna. It was likely due to the unlimited hollow lacking the focused power of Hollow Purple that Sukuna was able to survive by defending himself with domain amplification and reducing the damage somewhat. At this point, Gojo's regained enough output to heal himself with reverse curse technique thanks to the black flashes, while Sukuna is severely weakened and has lost his most powerful cards, and in his current state would likely be incapable of adequately using domain amplification to attack through Gojo's infinity. So clearly, Gojo wins. However, as Sukuna has said before, defeat is the same thing as death to him. So to defeat him, you must kill him. And if he isn't dead, he hasn't lost yet. At this point, enough time had passed. Not only was Gojo unaware of Sukuna's ultimate goal throughout the fight, but he had shown on multiple occasions that Sukuna's slashes were incapable of piercing through infinity. The slash performed by Mahoraga was something it achieved due to its adaptation ability, so it's completely reasonable for Gojo to think it's not something that Sukuna can do as well. Not only that, but the slash seemed to be instantaneous, and Gojo was unable to dodge it, despite possessing the Six Eyes. So when you combine that with Sukuna's very weakened state, Gojo's previous understanding of Cleave and Dismantle, and Mahoraga's destruction a moment prior, it makes complete sense that the world-cutting slash that hit Gojo was just as sudden and shocking to him as it was to the readers. With each of the timers set throughout this fight, Gojo fell just a little bit short of killing Sukuna before he needed to, and when the final chance to stop Sukuna from obtaining his goal arrived, he failed to reach it. Gojo loses. You may be wondering, why didn't Sukuna use any of the other things in his arsenal during this fight? What about the black box, the fire arrow? What about using Kamutoke or reverting back to his true form? Every time you ask these questions, it just goes to show how Gojo really never stood a chance. In this fight, Sukuna chose to only make use of his most basic and his most powerful abilities in order to permanently increase the power of his very simple technique. This path was the longest and most dangerous of the ones available to take in this fight, but it also was the one that proved to be the most fruitful. Sukuna was well aware of the fact that even after killing Gojo, there would be a line of people waiting to fight him immediately after, so expending his other resources before that point and showing his hand would leave him in a worse position, and gaining his world-cutting slash would make dealing with them significantly easier. The fight really could have been ended, or at least decided, far earlier, back during the first domain clash, when Gojo was left incapable of using Limitless, and Sukuna had the guaranteed hit effect from Malevolent Shrine. Even if Fuga isn't inscribed into the domain, the splash damage that could land from using it would be massive, and would severely weaken Gojo, if not outright kill him. The same goes for Kamutoke to a lesser extent. He also could have overwhelmed Gojo with his 10 Shadows Shikigami, even if it meant a few got destroyed in the process. However, this would not allow Sukuna to get the permanent upgrade he would receive if he allowed the fight to go on long enough for Mahoraga's adaptation to occur. If at any point after that he was dealt severe enough damage to significantly weaken his combat capabilities, or if his life was truly threatened, he could revert back to his true form and heal from all of that damage. However, I think there is the possibility that transforming like this would carry the risk of leaving Sukuna incapable of using Megami's technique due to the very extreme alteration of his body. So it was to be avoided until after Maharaga had served its purpose. The mastery of Jujutsu sorcery can be said to be the mastery of subtraction. And Sukuna has shown his unrivaled mastery of the principles behind Jujutsu sorcery on many occasions, especially here. Rather than going all out to kill Gojo and gain little from the battle beyond his enemy's death, Sukuna decided to use as little of his resources as possible to get the same result, while also obtaining a far greater reward for his troubles. This is not to say that the plan went off flawlessly, as there were several instances when Gojo exceeded Sukuna's expectations and threatened the success of his plan. But in each instance, Sukuna had something to fall back on outside of the countermeasures we already saw him make use of in the fight. None of this is to underplay how powerful Gojo was. All of the things that he achieved were still incredible, almost beyond belief, and things that almost no one else can compare to in terms of their capabilities. But in this battle to decide who is the strongest, Gojo fell short because, well, he's not the strongest anymore. And, well, in all honesty, it would seem he never really was. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It's one that I've been thinking about and wanting to do for quite some time. In the last video I did talking about what it takes to be the strongest, I mentioned how this idea for a video has split into 3 videos. This is the second one, and will presumably remain the longest of them. I'm not entirely sure, however, as the third and final video I have planned is going to be talking about Gojo's character, and in large part, why I think the conclusion he receives in this fight is perfect. So if you guys are looking forward to that, please be sure to leave a like and a comment on this video to support it, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, I'll see you guys around. Take care.